Dr. Jones, and today we're going to take a look at how we can integrate science and computer science, one of my favorites. But let's take a look at the definition of computer science. Computer science is defined as the study of computers, the algorithmic process, and including their principles in hardware and software designs. What we do in computer science is a lot of like what we do in science. It's a lot of trial and error, hypothesis, conditional statements, figuring out whether things work or not work. We just do it with a computer, then sometimes using hands-on materials. Although computers are hands-on, it just looks a little bit different. Let's take a look a bit about how the field of computer science is broken down. I call these my 4 buckets, and in these buckets, we've got infrastructure, which is the actual hardware pieces of computer science, data, digital, and programming. The reason why I bring these up is that in science, we do a lot with all of these concepts, with infrastructure, with data, and programming. We just do it a little bit differently in science. The infrastructure in science is your beakers or your Bunsen burners, or it could just be simple tools like water in a cup. In data, we use data in computer science to drive decisions. Those decisions are based on if you click here or if you click there. In science, it's if you decide to add this much water or this much heat, or we add in this molecule or this food coloring, we're going to get decisions. The data is going to come back and help guide the next steps we take. The same happens in computer science. It's just written in text or in numbers. The digital component is how we describe and showcase what we find. So with the digital component on a computer is clear. It's what you see on the screen. In computers, in science, it's often what we draw or sketch or how we show our answers. And programming is the algorithms. It is the source code and how we walk through an experiment. Same thing happens in computer science. We just tell the computer what to do with the language that we're teaching. We're going to take a look at a lesson today, and we're going to do it based on these 4 buckets and the concept of computational thinking. Remember that computational thinking is when we decompose, pattern recognize, abstract, and create that algorithm. That is a process of problem solving, and we do it on a regular basis, whether we're working with a computer or whether we're doing a science experiment. Let's take a look at a couple of vocabulary words that I think will help us get our mind around the similarities between science and computer science. First are conditionals. Those are statements that run only under certain conditions. Think about how you use conditionals when you are exploring in science. That could be weather. It could be the way how much water you put in, chemicals. It could be whether or not you have a large sum or a small sum of food. It is conditionals are based on certain conditions, and those conditions are going to influence our experiment. In computer science, we use that to make decisions. If you click here, then, else you don't. Same thing happens in science. Data. Data is what drives science and computer science. We want to know what happens when we have this experiment. We want to know what happens when we eat certain foods or we drink certain waters. Not certain waters, but when we drink water, how does that help keep us hydrated? How does that help a plant grow? How does that help in an experiment? How does that put out fire? All of those pieces are the same things that we use in computer science. Data just happens to be collected by what we use on the computer. And most of that's driven by a conditional statement. And the last vocabulary we're going to take a look at is variable, which is a placeholder. We know variables are what we can use to interchange. So in a science experiment, it may mean that we have a placebo group and we have one that's an experiment. Same thing happens in computer science. We use variables to make decisions about what we're going to do on the computer, on our cell phone, maybe on the television, any of those pieces. So today's experiment is looking at being a color detective, using coffee filters to explain color. This is a chromatography experiment where we're going to look at the colors and how those colors can change based on water and molecules. I like to bring up that word molecules because that's something you use very often in science. So what are the materials that we need for this particular experiment? This is something that can be done in person or virtually. Because you can purchase the coffee filters at the dollar store, or we could provide them in a pack to students. Or so that either way could work for virtual or in person. They have used coffee filters, used drawing markers. Now, this could be a part that would be a really cool opportunity for you to take a look at in terms of what kind of marker do you use? Do you use a washable or a permanent marker? At least 2 pencils because you want to use that to help with the drawing. Water glasses, water, and a pen or a pencil for taking notes. Let's take a look at what this experiment's going to look like. But before we do that, here are a couple of probing questions that you could put forth to your students. What is your hypothesis? Duh, that's what you do in science. If we add 2 color markers, what happens? How much time do we think it's going to take once we put the coffee filter in the water to begin to change? And how will the water move the molecules? And is the type of marker we use important? These are just a few sample questions, and the reason why I put these forth is to think about how much time when you place it in water do you think it's going to take for it to change is a data point. It's a collection, and you can make a hypothesis about that as well. Here's a quick video on the experiment. Let's see if I can open this. All right, so you could play this video to talk more about the different pieces, the molecules, the capillaries, the way in which the color changes. If you notice, it changed very quickly. These are all data points that you could use in conversation with your students. So let's look at a couple of reflections. Was your hypothesis correct? What happened when you added 2 colors? How long did it take to change? Ask your neighbor and collect their information. You could have, as a full class discussion, everyone contribute their hypothesis, and then you could run a 5-number summary to figure out the average, the mean, the median, the min, and the max. So we're also incorporating some math skills. That information can drive decisions on how long do you think the water actually changes and why. We would have a better explanation the next time we ran that experiment. So let's recap. We looked at a couple of different computer science vocabulary words that go along with science: conditionals, data, and variables. Conditionals are what will happen if you add more than 2 colors. What if you change the size of the coffee filter? The data information is collecting the experiment results and the collection of the hypothesis and figuring out, were we right or were we wrong? How many of us said yes, that we thought that it would change, or no, we didn't think it would change? How many of us thought it would change in 5 minutes or 2 minutes? What is that information? And what does that say about the quickness of how that porous object worked? And then variables. The placeholder. So variables are the markers, the type of marker that you use, the size of the coffee filter, time. All of those pieces are the variables in this particular experiment. And those variables are the same things that we can think about when we're working in computer science. How do those influence the way in which we develop an application, software, or just use the web based on visiting a website? Connecting computer science and science is actually a lot of fun. While it's not exactly perfect because we do different experiments in science than what we do in computer science, the things that we learn together will help students be able to explore both disciplines with confidence and lots of fun. This has been looking at integrating science and computer science. I can't wait to see you next time.